The German officer's boots crunched through the snow as he approached the American lines under a white flag. In his hand, an ultimatum. 2 hours to surrender. 6 batteries of heavy artillery aimed at the town. Resistance is futile. Inside a freezing Belgian cellar, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe read the typed message. His men were surrounded. No food, low on ammunition. The wounded were dying from cold. Every military manual said surrender was the logical choice. McAuliffe grabbed a pencil. He wrote one word, 4 letters that would echo through history. 4 letters that captured the soul of the American soldier. 4 letters that told the Germans exactly where they could shove their ultimatum. But the story of how those 4 letters came to be written and what happened next is a Christmas miracle wrapped in blood, snow, and steel. This is Bastogne, December 1944. This is the stand that changed everything. December 6th, the Ardennes forest. Hitler had one last throw of the dice. Operation Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine, unleashed 200,000 German troops and 1,000 tanks through a 75-mile front that American commanders thought was too rugged, too forested, too quiet to worry about. They were catastrophically wrong. Within 48 hours, German panzers had torn through American lines. Green divisions, replacement units, men who'd never seen combat, they broke and ran or died where they stood. The German advance created a massive bulge in Allied lines, driving west toward the vital port of Antwerp. Right in the path of that armored avalanche sat a small Belgian market town, Bastogne. 7 roads met there, every road the Germans needed to keep their offensive moving. Bastogne wasn't just a town. It was the crossroads of the entire Battle of the Bulge. On December 10th, the 101st Airborne Division, the Screaming Eagles, got emergency orders. Get to Bastogne, hold it no matter what. These were the same paratroopers who'd jumped into Normandy on D-Day, men who'd fought through Market Garden in Holland. They were tough, experienced, and cocky as hell. But they'd been pulled back to rest and refit. Some didn't even have their full equipment. They loaded onto trucks in a snowstorm and rolled toward Bastogne, not knowing they were driving straight into a closing trap. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, acting division commander, was an artillery officer from Washington, D.C. 46 years old, calm, professional, not the type to waste words. His men called him Old Croc behind his back, a term of respect mixed with the affection soldiers reserve for commanders who don't get them killed unnecessarily. McAuliffe looked at the situation maps. German armor converging from 3 directions. His division scattered across multiple towns around Bastogne. Supply lines already cut. Weather so bad that air support was grounded. "We're not leaving," he said simply. "We hold." By December 20th, the jaws of the trap had snapped shut. Bastogne was completely surrounded. 15,000 American soldiers, cut off, outnumbered 3-1, facing the best panzer divisions Germany had left. The siege had begun. Private First Class Eugene Garrett was 20 years old, from a tobacco farm in North Carolina. He'd never been cold like this, never hungry like this, never scared like this. His foxhole near the town of Foy was barely 3 feet deep, the ground too frozen to dig deeper. He shared it with 2 other men, Corporal Bill Simmons from Detroit, a factory worker who'd been cracking jokes since D-Day, and Private Jake Morrison from rural Montana, a quiet kid who kept a photo of his sweetheart tucked inside his helmet liner. The cold was as much an enemy as the Germans. Temperatures dropped to 10 degrees Fahrenheit, then lower. Eugene's summer weight uniform and worn boots weren't enough. His hands were so numb he could barely feel his rifle. When German artillery came screaming in, men who couldn't dig deep enough just died. Eugene watched it happen on December 20th. The foxhole 50 yards to his left took a direct hit. 3 men gone. Just like that. One moment they were there, complaining about the cold and betting on when relief would arrive. The next moment there was just a crater smoking in the snow and pieces of things Eugene tried not to look at too closely. Bill Simmons stopped cracking jokes after that. Jake Morrison threw up in the corner of the foxhole and wouldn't stop shaking for an hour. Eugene just stared at the place where his friends had been and thought about tobacco fields in August, about heat and sweat and complaining about the sun. He would have given anything for the sun. Food ran out almost immediately. The 101st had rushed to Bastogne so fast they'd left their supplies behind. What little they had, K rations and hard biscuits, was gone in 2 days. Eugene shared a single can of beans with Bill and Jake, each man getting maybe 3 spoonfuls. They melted snow for water and tried not to think about Christmas dinner back home. Eugene's mother would be making ham, sweet potatoes, cornbread. His kid sister would be setting the table and sneaking bites of everything before grace was said. His father would be sitting by the radio waiting for news from Europe, waiting to hear if his boy was okay. Eugene wanted to tell him, "Dad, I'm here. I'm cold and I'm hungry and I'm more scared than I've ever been in my life. But I'm here. I'm still here." Ammunition was rationed like gold. Artillery crews were told 10 shells per day, not per hour, per day. Make every shot count because there wouldn't be more. Medical supplies vanished even faster. Captain John McAleer, a surgeon from Philadelphia, worked in a basement aid station that smelled of blood and gangrene and death. He was 32 years old, married, father of 2 daughters he'd never met because they were born while he was overseas. Morphine ran out on December 21st. Plasma ran out the same day. Bandages ran out. John operated by candlelight using kitchen tables while wounded men screamed. On December 22nd, a young soldier was carried in with both legs shattered by shrapnel, maybe 19 years old, blonde hair, from Iowa or Nebraska, John thought, one of those flat states where kids grew up strong and simple and trusting. The kid kept asking if it was Christmas yet. His mother had promised to light a candle for him at midnight mass. He wanted to know if she'd remember. John had no morphine to give him, no plasma to replace his blood loss. He held the kid's hand while he died. It took 20 minutes. The kid never stopped asking about the candle. At the end, he smiled and said, "She remembered. I can see it." John McAleer, who'd seen men die on operating tables from North Africa to Normandy, sat down in the corner of his blood-soaked aid station and wept. He wept for the kid from Iowa or Nebraska. He wept for his own daughters who were growing up without him. He wept because he was a doctor, and doctors are supposed to save lives, and here he was watching kids die because he didn't have a bag of plasma or a morphine syringe. Then he stood up. Because other wounded men were coming, and someone had to try. And every day the Germans attacked. They came at dawn through the fog. They came at dusk when visibility dropped. Panzers and infantry probing the perimeter, looking for weak points, trying to crack the American defense. The 101st held at Foy, at Bizarre, at Noville. Small towns with unpronounceable names became battlegrounds where men fought house to house, room to room, until the snow turned red and the streets were choked with dead. Eugene Garrett fired his rifle until his hands cramped. He'd never killed a man before the war. Now he'd killed so many he'd stopped counting. Bill Simmons got hit on December 1st, a piece of shrapnel through the shoulder. He refused to go to the aid station. "They got boys worse off than me," he said through gritted teeth, wrapping the wound himself with strips torn from his undershirt. Jake Morrison wrote letters to his sweetheart every night, even though there was no way to mail them. He wrote by candlelight, his handwriting shaky from cold and fear. "Dear Sarah, I'm somewhere in Belgium. I can't tell you more than that. But I want you to know that when I close my eyes, I see your face. That's what keeps me going." The weather was so bad that supply planes couldn't fly. The thick, overcast ceiling grounded the American air superiority that had dominated European skies since D-Day. Bastogne was alone. German loudspeakers blared propaganda across the lines. "Americans, you are surrounded. Your situation is hopeless. Surrender now, and you will be treated well under the Geneva Convention. Resist, and you will be annihilated." Jake Morrison, quiet. Jake, who never raised his voice, stood up in the foxhole and shouted back, "Come get us, you Nazi bastards!" Eugene grabbed him and pulled him down before a sniper could find him. "You trying to get killed?" Eugene hissed. Jake's face was wild, desperate. Maybe. At least it'd be warm in hell. The Germans tried. Over and over they tried. On December 21st, a major panzer attack nearly broke through the perimeter near Champs. American tank destroyers, thin-skinned vehicles with big guns, met the German Tigers in point-blank range duels. The Americans lost half their vehicles but stopped the attack. Medics ran through the open to drag wounded soldiers back to aid stations. Officers radioed for artillery support that never came because there were no shells to fire. Sergeants held shattered squads together through sheer force of personality. And in his headquarters in a Belgian barrack cellar, General McAuliffe studied maps by candlelight and made impossible decisions about which positions to reinforce and which to abandon. "We're not quitting," he told his staff. "We make them pay for every yard." By December 22nd, the situation was desperate. German forces had been reinforced. The Americans hadn't. The perimeter was stretched so thin that in some places there were 50 yards between foxholes. A single German breakthrough could collapse the entire defense. That's when the Germans decided to try diplomacy. Around noon on December 22nd, 4 German soldiers appeared on the American lines near the town of Rhein. They carried a white flag. American soldiers tensed. Was this a trick? The German officer in charge, a major, was blindfolded and escorted to the command post of F Company, 327th Glider Infantry Regiment. Word went up the chain. Finally, the order came down. Send them up. The Germans carried a written message, typed in English, formal, polite, and utterly chilling, to the USA, commander of the encircled town of Bastogne. The message was clear: surrender within 2 hours or face total annihilation. The Germans pointed out, correctly, that Bastogne was surrounded, that supplies were cut off, that resistance was militarily futile. They promised humane treatment for prisoners of war. They warned that continued resistance would result in the complete destruction of the town and everyone in it. There is only one possibility to save the encircled USA troops from total annihilation. That is the honorable surrender of the encircled town. The message ended with a deadline, 2 hours. The German officers waited, confident. After all, the Americans had to see reason. This wasn't cowardice. This was military logic. Why die for a small Belgian town in the middle of nowhere? The message was delivered to General McAuliffe. He read it once, then again. His staff watched, waiting for orders. Prepare to destroy equipment, burn classified documents, issue surrender instructions? McAuliffe looked up from the paper. "Aw, nuts," he said. Colonel Harry Kennard, his operations officer, laughed. "That's it. That's your official response." McAuliffe blinked. "What do you mean?" "You said nuts. That's perfect. Send it back exactly like that." McAuliffe considered. He was a professional officer. Formal military protocol existed for a reason. Surely he should write something more official. Then he thought about his men. Kids from Iowa and Alabama and Oregon and North Carolina, freezing in foxholes, sharing scraps of food, fighting off panzers with rifles and guts. He thought about the wounded dying in cellars because there was no morphine. He thought about the German arrogance. Surrender or be annihilated. "All right," McAuliffe said. He grabbed a pencil and a piece of paper. He wrote, "To the German commander, nuts, the American commander." That was it. 1 word, 4 letters. The most American response imaginable. Colonel Joseph Harper, commander of the 327th Glider Infantry, was selected to deliver McAuliffe's response. He walked into the room holding the typed message. The Germans stood formally. "Do you have an answer?" the German major asked in accented English. "I have the American commander's reply," Harper said. He handed over the paper. The German major read it, then read it again. His face showed confusion. "Nuts," he said, pronouncing it carefully. "What does this mean?" Harper's face was stone. "It means exactly what you think it means." "I do not understand," the major said. "Is this affirmative or negative?" "It's definitely not affirmative," Harper said. "So you refuse to surrender?" Harper leaned forward. "If you don't know what nuts means, I'll translate. Go to hell, and I'll tell you something else. If you continue this foolish attack, you're going to be sorry." The German major stiffened. "We will kill many Americans. This is foolish resistance." Harper's voice went cold. "We're American soldiers. We've been killing Germans since North Africa. We'll take our chances. Now get the hell out of my lines." The Germans were blindfolded again and escorted back to their own positions. Behind them, word of McAuliffe's response spread through the American lines like wildfire. "Nuts!" Soldiers laughed. For the first time in days, they laughed. Eugene Garrett heard it from a runner who'd come up with the daily water ration, 1 canteen for 3 men. "The general told the Krauts to go to hell. 1 word, nuts!" Eugene laughed so hard he cried. Bill Simmons, holding his wounded shoulder, laughed until he had to sit down. Jake Morrison wrote it in his letter to Sarah. "Today our general told the German army to go to hell. I think I'm going to make it home after all." Morale, which had been hanging by a thread, suddenly surged. If the old man was telling the Germans to shove it, then maybe, just maybe, they really could hold out. "Nuts!" became a battle cry. Men shouted it at German positions. They scrawled it on shell casings. It was defiance and humor and courage rolled into 4 letters, but words wouldn't stop panzers. The Germans, insulted and infuriated, prepared their promised annihilation. December 24th, 1904, Christmas Eve, the Germans unleashed everything they had. Artillery thundered. Luftwaffe bombers, rare now due to Allied air dominance, appeared through breaks in the clouds to drop bombs on Bastogne's center. Buildings collapsed, fires spread, civilians huddled in cellars alongside American soldiers. The perimeter attacks intensified. At every position, Germans pushed forward. Eugene Garrett's foxhole took 3 near misses in 2 hours. The third one caved in part of the wall, dumping frozen dirt on top of them. For a terrifying moment, Eugene thought they were buried alive. He clawed at the dirt, covering his face, gasping, panicking. Bill Simmons grabbed him. "Breathe, you're okay, you're okay." Eugene wasn't okay. None of them were okay. But they were alive, and that had to be enough. Inside the aid stations, Captain John McAleer worked miracles with nothing. He operated continuously for 36 hours, removing shrapnel, amputating frozen limbs, sewing wounds with thread scavenged from parachutes. When the Iowa kid haunted his thoughts, he forced himself to focus on the soldier in front of him. Save this one, then the next one, then the next. That's all he could do. That afternoon, General McAuliffe sat down to write a Christmas message to his troops. He could have written something formal, something about duty and honor and sacrifice. Instead, he wrote from the heart. "What's merry about all this, you ask? We're fighting. It's cold. We aren't home. All true. But what has the proud Eagle Division accomplished with its worthy comrades? Just this. We have stopped cold everything that has been thrown at us from the north, east, south, and west. We have identifications from 4 German panzer divisions, 2 German infantry divisions, and 1 German parachute division. These units, spearheading the last desperate German lunge, were headed straight west for key points when the Eagle Division was hurriedly ordered to stem the advance. How effectively this was done will be written in history, not alone in our division's glorious history, but in world history. The Germans actually did surround us. Their radios blared our doom. Their commander demanded our surrender in the following impudent arrogance. McAuliffe quoted the German ultimatum, then continued. The German commander received the following reply. "Nuts! Allied troops are counterattacking in force. We continue to hold Bastogne. By holding Bastogne, we assure the success of the Allied armies. We know that our division commander, General Taylor, will say, 'Well done. We are giving our country and our loved ones at home a worthy Christmas present, and being privileged to take part in this gallant feat of arms, are truly making for ourselves a Merry Christmas.'" Copies were distributed to every unit. Eugene Garrett read as by candlelight in the foxhole, his hands shaking so badly from cold and exhaustion he could barely hold the paper. When he finished, he folded it carefully and put it in his pocket next to his mother's last letter. Bill Simmons read it and nodded slowly. "The old man's right. We're doing something here." Jake Morrison read it 3 times, then added a postscript to his letter to Sarah. "We're making history. I wish I wasn't so scared while we're doing it." That evening, as darkness fell, something changed. The weather. For the first time in a week, the overcast began to break. Stars appeared. The temperature dropped even further, creating crystal clear skies. And with clear skies came hope, because clear skies meant the Air Force could fly. Christmas morning, December 25th, 1944. Soldiers in frozen foxholes heard it first. A distant rumble, growing louder. Engines. Eugene Garrett looked up, squinting against the bright winter sun. Through the brilliant blue winter sky came planes, hundreds of planes. C-47 transport aircraft in massive formations, escorted by Thunderbolt fighters. "They're ours!" Jake Morrison screamed. "They're ours!" Men climbed out of foxholes, waving, shouting, crying. Eugene Garrett, who hadn't cried when his friends died, who hadn't cried through 6 days of artillery and cold and hunger, cried now. Because they weren't alone anymore. The cavalry had arrived. The planes came in low, dangerously low, flying barely 400 feet above the ground to avoid German anti-aircraft fire. Their bomb bay doors opened, and out came Salvation. Parachutes, hundreds of parachutes in red, white, blue, yellow, and orange, different colors for different supplies. They blossomed in the winter sky like flowers drifting down into the besieged perimeter. Ammunition, food, medical supplies, gasoline, spare parts, everything the 101st needed to keep fighting. Eugene and Bill and Jake ran through German fire to retrieve bundles that landed near their position. A yellow parachute held ammunition. A red one held food. An orange one held medical supplies. Eugene tore open the food bundle with his bare hands, canned turkey, crackers, chocolate. He stuffed a piece of chocolate in his mouth, and it was the best thing he'd ever tasted. Better than his mother's ham. Better than anything. Because it meant they were going to live. Captain John McAleer's aid station received 30 parachutes full of medical supplies. Morphine, plasma, bandages, sulfa powder, everything he'd been praying for. He stood in the middle of his blood-soaked basement with tears running down his face, holding a bottle of plasma like it was the Holy Grail. His medics were cheering. The wounded men who could still move were cheering. John thought about the Iowa kid who'd asked about his mother's candle. "I'm sorry, kid. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. But I can save these men. I can save them now." Artillery crews suddenly had shells again. Hundreds of shells. They didn't have to ration anymore. German positions that had been harassing the perimeter for days were smashed in minutes. But supplies weren't the only thing the clear weather brought. Fighter bombers, American P-47 Thunderbolts, and British Typhoons appeared over the battlefield. They strafed German columns. They rocketed panzer formations. They bombed artillery positions. For a week, the Germans had owned the battlefield. Now, suddenly, they were the ones being hunted. That Christmas dinner in Bastogne was canned turkey, cold, eaten with dirty hands in a frozen foxhole. Eugene Garrett shared his can with Bill and Jake. They ate slowly, savoring every bite. Jake said grace. He wasn't a particularly religious kid, but he said it anyway. "Lord, thank you for this food. Thank you for keeping us alive. Please watch over Sarah and tell her I'm okay. Amen." "Amen," Eugene and Bill said together. They ate their turkey and thought about home and allowed themselves, for the first time in days, to hope. But the Germans weren't done yet. They threw everything into one last desperate attempt to take Bastogne before relief arrived. December 26th. The attack came at dawn. German infantry and armor hit multiple positions simultaneously. Eugene's foxhole at Foy took the brunt of a panzer assault. Tigers appeared through the morning fog, massive and unstoppable. Eugene fired his rifle at them, knowing it was useless, knowing rifle bullets couldn't stop 50 tons of German steel, but firing anyway because what else could he do? Bill Simmons, wounded shoulder and all, fired beside him. Jake Morrison fired until his rifle jammed, then grabbed a bazooka from a dead soldier and fired that instead. The bazooka round hit a tiger's track, crippling it. The tank slewed sideways, blocking the path of the tanks behind it. It bought them 30 seconds. It was enough. American tank destroyers arrived, engaging the panzers at point-blank range. The fight devolved into chaos. Tanks burning, men screaming. Snow turned black with smoke and red with blood. And then through the smoke and chaos, Eugene saw something moving up the road. Sherman tanks, American Shermans, moving fast, firing as they advanced. The 4th Armored Division had broken through. Eugene Garrett, who'd been sure he was going to die in a frozen foxhole in Belgium, sat down in the snow and laughed. He laughed until his sides hurt. He laughed until Bill and Jake thought he'd lost his mind. Maybe he had, but they'd made it. They'd actually made it. At 4:45 p.m. on December 26th, the first Sherman tank from the 4th Armored rolled into Bastogne's perimeter. The siege was over. Men who'd been holding the line for 8 days staggered out of foxholes. They looked like scarecrows, thin, dirty, hollow-eyed, but they were alive. And they'd won. General George Patton's Third Army had performed one of the most impressive military maneuvers of the war, disengaging 3 entire divisions from active combat, rotating them 90 degrees, and charging north through snow and ice to relieve Bastogne. It was a logistical nightmare. It was tactically insane. It was vintage Patton, and it worked. McAuliffe met the relief column. Someone asked him how things were. "We're in fine shape now," he said simply. Reporters asked what it was like to be besieged. McAuliffe shrugged. "What siege? We were just holding the line." The Battle of the Bulge wasn't over. Fighting would continue into January. But the German offensive was broken. Bastogne, the crossroads, had held. Hitler's last gamble had failed. The 101st Airborne suffered 2,000 casualties during the siege. Dead, wounded, captured, or missing. But they destroyed or damaged over 500 German vehicles and killed or wounded an estimated 15,000 enemy soldiers. More importantly, they'd held the crossroads. Every day Bastogne held was another day the German offensive stalled. Every hour bought was another hour for Patton to arrive and Allied forces to regroup. The Germans never reached Antwerp. They never split the Allied armies. Their panzer divisions were shattered in the Ardennes forests and Belgian towns. From Bastogne onward, Germany was losing the war. Eugene Garrett went home in May 1940. He got off the train in North Carolina, and his mother was waiting. She hugged him, and he held her and smelled her perfume and started crying. He cried for the friends who died in the foxhole 50 yards away. He cried for the Iowa kid asking about his mother's candle. He cried because he was home and they weren't, and it wasn't fair. His mother didn't ask questions. She just held him. That night, at dinner, his father asked, "You want to talk about it?" Eugene shook his head. "Not yet, maybe never." His father nodded. "That's okay, son. Just know we're proud of you." Eugene looked at his kid sisters setting the table, at the ham and sweet potatoes and cornbread. "Can we say grace?" he asked. They held hands around the table, and Eugene said the same prayer Jake Morrison had said in a frozen foxhole on Christmas Day, 44. "Lord, thank you for this food. Thank you for keeping us alive. Amen." Bill Simmons went back to Detroit and his factory job. The shoulder healed, but it ached when it rained. He never talked about Bastogne. When people asked, he'd say, "It was cold. That's all I remember. It was really cold." But every Christmas, he'd stand in his driveway at midnight and look up at the stars, clear and bright, and think about parachutes drifting down from a winter sky. His grandson asked him once, "Grandpa, why do you always go outside on Christmas?" Bill smiled. "Just checking the weather, kid, just checking the weather." Jake Morrison married Sarah 3 months after he got home. He gave her the letters he'd written in the foxhole. 12 letters she'd never received because there was no mail service in a besieged town. She read them all in one sitting, crying. At their wedding, during the reception, someone asked Jake what Bastogne was like. He looked at Sarah. "It was hell, but I had something to live for, so I did." Captain John McAleer returned to Philadelphia and met his daughters for the first time. They were 3 and 2 years old. They didn't remember him. He sat on the floor of his living room and played with them and thought about the Iowa kid who'd asked about his mother's candle. That summer, John drove to Cedar Rapids, Iowa. He looked up the kid's family in the phone book. Robert Jensen, 19 years old, killed in action, Bastogne, Belgium, December 22nd, 1944. John knocked on the door. Robert's mother answered. She was a small woman with graying hair and hair eyes. John introduced himself. "I was your son's doctor in Bastogne. I couldn't save him. I didn't have the supplies. But I wanted you to know he wasn't alone. I held his hand. At the end, he said he could see your candle, the one you lit at midnight mass." Mrs. Jensen stared at him. Then she started crying. "I lit that candle every Christmas he was overseas. I lit it at midnight on Christmas Eve, 1944. I prayed so hard he'd know I was thinking of him." John's voice broke. He knew. He saw it. Those were his last words. They stood on her porch and cried together. 2 people connected by a boy who'd died in a basement in Belgium, asking about a candle. Before John left, Mrs. Jensen gave him something, a photograph. Robert Jensen in his uniform, smiling, young, invincible. "Thank you for being there," she said. "Thank you for holding his hand." John kept that photograph in his wallet for the rest of his life. In 1945, General McAuliffe returned home a hero. The press loved the nuts story. It was perfect. Cocky American defiance captured in 4 letters. But McAuliffe was uncomfortable with the attention. "I just said what any American soldier would have said," he insisted. "We weren't going to surrender. That's all." He was promoted to Major General and later Lieutenant General. He commanded troops in Korea. He retired in 1950 and died in 1995 at age 7. At his funeral, military honors were rendered, flags folded, taps played, and on his gravestone, along with his rank and dates of service, is carved one word: nuts. Because that's what he was to America. Not a military genius, not a brilliant strategist, just a tough, plain-spoken commander who told the enemy to go to hell and then backed it up. Years later, veterans of Bastogne gathered for reunions. They were old men by then, grandfathers, retirees, men with soft hands and gentle eyes who didn't talk much about the war. But when they saw each other, something changed. The years fell away. They were young again, scared again, cold again. They'd slap each other on the back and laugh and tell stories they'd never tell their families. Remember when the general told the Krauts to shove it? Remember the parachutes on Christmas morning? Remember thinking we were all going to die? And then suddenly we didn't? At one reunion in the 1970s, Eugene Garrett saw Bill Simmons and Jake Morrison for the first time since 1940. They stood looking at each other for a long moment. Then Jake said, "I married Sarah." Eugene grinned. "I know. I saw the announcement in Stars and Stripes. Bill held up his arm. Shoulder still hurts when it rains. They laughed. They hugged. They cried. They spent the evening not talking about Bastogne, but understanding that they didn't have to. They'd been there, in the foxhole. That was enough. When they sang Christmas carols at the reunion dinner, their voices always broke on Silent Night, because they remembered a Christmas that wasn't silent, a Christmas of artillery and screaming and death. And they remembered one word that captured everything about why they fought, why they held, why they refused to quit even when quitting made military sense. Nuts. Today, there's a monument in Bastogne, a massive stone marker with the names of the units that fought there. Tourists visit. School groups take field trips. The town is peaceful now, prosperous, no longer surrounded by frozen foxholes and destroyed panzers. But every Christmas, a ceremony is held. Wreaths are laid. The Belgian national anthem is played. Then the American anthem. And someone, usually a veteran, if any are still alive, or a family member if not, reads McAuliffe's Christmas message from 1944. The message about giving loved ones a worthy Christmas present. The message about making themselves a Merry Christmas by holding the line. In the crowd, you'll sometimes see very old men with tears on their faces, veterans, or the children of veterans, or the grandchildren. They stand in the cold Belgian winter and think about boys who died in foxholes, about doctors who operated without morphine, about a general who wrote one word that became a legend. They think about Eugene Garrett and Bill Simmons and Jake Morrison, about Captain John McAleer and the Iowa kid who saw his mother's candle, about 15,000 men who were told to surrender and said, "Go to hell," about Americans who held a frozen town in the middle of nowhere because somebody had to, about choosing frozen foxholes and long odds over the dishonor of surrender, about proving that sometimes the most powerful military strategy isn't in the manual. Sometimes it's 4 letters. Nuts. That's the American answer, then, now, always. To anyone who thinks Americans will fold when the pressure gets tough, history has a 4-letter response. We don't quit. We don't break. We don't surrender. We just say, nuts. And then we win. In homes across America, Christmas trees shine with lights. Families gather around dinner tables. Children open presents. Churches fill with people singing carols. It's warm. It's safe. It's everything Eugene Garrett dreamed about in his frozen foxhole. Everything Jake Morrison promised Sarah he'd come home for. Everything Captain John McAleer fought to protect. They gave us this. The boys in Bastogne, the boys who held the line. They gave us Christmas in peace. They gave us the right to sit in warm rooms and sing about silent nights without hearing artillery over the hymns. They gave us freedom. And all they asked in return was that we remember. Remember the cold. Remember the fear. Remember the courage. Remember the boys who didn't come home. And remember 4 letters that captured the American spirit in its purest form. Nuts, Merry Christmas, and thank you. Thank you to the men of Bastogne. Thank you for the gift you gave us. We remember. We will always remember.